You can tell a good director in about 5 minutes. Doesn't take longer. If you've been around at all, you spot a director in 5 minutes.
Richard Widmark was not like other people. Roll. He was a real hero of classic Los Angeles. These powerful shows of it helped make the golden age of movies possible. But there was a man behind the fame who had a lot of problems. From a little town in Minnesota to the big city of Hollywood, his path was anything but simple. Do you know what Richard Widmark had to go through to be successful? You're in the right place if not. Hey, my name is Mr. Heyman, and today we will talk about Richard Widmark's names, the 5 stars he really didn't like. But before we start, if you like Richard Widmark or love old westerns movies, don't forget to sign up for our channel. We tell great stories about western stars and old-school Hollywood icons. Richard Widmark came into the world in the Minnesota town of Sunrise is small. But they didn't stay there for long. In less than a year, they moved to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where his dad Carl still lives. Henry Widmark had begun a new job as a salesman who goes around. Not long after the move, Ethel May, Richard's mother, gave him Donald, his younger brother, was born on July 25, 1918. The two men brothers, they got close quickly and stayed that way all through their lives. Richard a lot said that his love of movies came from my Scottish grandma was a big fan of Tom Mix, the cowboy star. It would be hers to little Richard to the movies 2 or even 3 times a week, beginning when he was only 4 years old, sparking a love that would always be with him. The family moved around a lot because of Carl's work, but in the end they moved to Princeton, Illinois. Carl bought a bakery there and gave it the name Henry's Bread Shop. The family lived in an apartment above the shop. A place they could call home was found. Richard Widmark went to high school at Princeton. School where he did well in school, played football and even got a president when he was a senior. However, during his junior year, his parents Carl and Ethel split up. Ethel stayed in Princeton to raise Richard and his brother until they got their diplomas. Richard high school in 1932 and went to Lake Forest College for free, having plans to become a lawyer. While at Lake Forest, Richard kept playing football and came in third in a national tournament speech game. He also took part in college plays. Even though he was shy he liked playing, he was afraid of people. I thought it was but their love for the stage grew very quickly. When he met Aurora, things changed the most. A fellow theater student named Jean Hazelwood who also wants to be an actress. She would meet the love of his life. Richard he finished in 1936 and was asked to stay at Lake Forest to help with theater and speech lessons. He stayed for 2 years, but in 1938, he got ready and going to New York City to take a shot at broadcast because a friend asked me to. Jean Hazelwood was also there by chance. In New York, going to school at the American Academy of the Performing Arts. Richard soon received parts in radio shows such as A Jenny's True Stories and his during the time he rushed between studios. On April 5, 1942, only a few months after the U.S. joined during World War II, Richard and Jean married in Evanston, where she grew up, in Illinois. Richard always said he wouldn't even try to flirt with another woman afterward getting to know Jean. "I like my wife a lot," he once said a lot. It was a long marriage. For 55 years, there has been no Hollywood scandal. Richard tried to join the army during the war, but he was turned down because to an eardrum that is holed up. During this time, my brother Donald was called up and sent to Europe. In 1943, bad things happened when their plane was shot down over the Netherlands. He was the only one from his crew to stay alive and spent more than in a German prison camp for a year. Even though he got home, but his health never got better. He had terrible headaches. And in 1951 became partially unable to move. Too bad, on December 22, 1955, Donald died of a brain tumor at she is only 37 years old. Richard did everything he could to take care of his brother and said the government a lot didn't get how much Donald was definitely in pain. In 1943, Richard Widmark and Jean, his wife, were don't worry about Jean's brother, Donald. Richard was able to make it through the war, getting his job off the ground. He made Kiss and Tell was his first show on Broadway. Started playing for American troops the American Theater Wing. At that point, Richard was already making a lot of money from work on the radio and stage. In 1945, Richard and Jean had their only child, Anne. It was July 25 when Heath Widmark was born. Soon Richard then got an offer that would change his life. From business executive at 20th Century Fox Darryl F. Scary. He was asked to play a rough guy. Tom Udo is a killer in Kiss of Death, which starred Victor Mature. But the movie's Henry Hathaway, the director, didn't think Richard was right for the part. He thought Richard's high looked too good on him. Brow to look like a real killer. But Zanuck insisted, and Richard the part. Hawaii wasn't pleased and made he had trouble shooting. Richard only was interested in the part because New York was the place where it happened. To my surprise, this was his very first show. And in the very first scene he ever shot. Scary impression. As Tommy Udo, he did notoriously pushed an old woman in a wheelchair down a set of stairs and laughed in a crazy, creepy way that would go in the history of movies. That scene got him a nod for an Academy Award for Best. He won a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor Globe as the most talented man brand new. I thought this, Richard laughed. It was easy to play. I haven't won anything yet. Anything since then. He also said that when he saw himself on TV for the first time, he was shocked and said he thought about killing himself. But people were hooked. They hate a lot. Fox gave him a role in movie a 7-year deal, even though he had signed a bad deal at first just to take on the part of Tommy Udo. In 1948, acted in Yellow Sky with Gregory Peck and Ann Baxter. In the same year, also showed up in Roadhouse with Celeste Holm and The Street with No Name with Mary Lawrence and Lloyd Nolan. The next year, in 1949, he was in Lionel Goes Down to the Sea and Ships. Barrymore. It was 1950 when the studio gave him There Are Two Big Projects. The first was Nerves in the Streets, which was directed by Ella Kazan, an old friend from Broadway who had pushed Richard to try out for Kiss of Death in 1947. Even though the movie some big names like Jack Palance and Zero Mel, it didn't do well financially, mostly because the movie was shot in It cost too much in New Orleans. After that, Richard was in No Way Out, a Sidney Poitier in a racially charged play Kathy Darnell and Linda. Richard did a racist named Ray Bid, a part he didn't play would like to take. And the company made him do it. After each scary scene, Richard I would say sorry to Poitier and, Sid, you know this is all for show, correct? Poitier asked. He replied, Dick, I get it. I'm an actor, too. They became good friends of Sidney and added that Richard was the first person in Hollywood to ask him to dinner, a kind deed that meant the world to at the time. Before looking into for the rest of Richard Widmark's days, let's talk about what the video is mostly about. Richard Widmark was in 1951. A movie about World War II called Halls of Montezuma set on an island that the Japanese controlled. He co-starred with an old radio friend Carl Malden and Jack Palance, Richard Boone and a young Robert Wagner, who was given his first title part in this movie. The following year in 1952, Widmark was on the same movie screen as Marilyn Monroe and Don't Bother to Ask for Help. Richard once said that Marilyn was a weak soul, like a bird that has been hurt. He really wanted to be famous, but she is scared of everything around her. She often hid in her room for hours, and by late afternoon, the crew they would beg her to come out so they go home at last. She had trouble to remember her words, and while they were filming, you'd think she did a terrible job. But after the movie was cut and put on, she looked beautiful on the big screen. There were rumors that Marilyn often had flings with her co-stars. Richard said, "Not with me. She didn't even flirt." With 1954, he worked with Robert again. Wagner, this time with Spencer Tracy cameo in Broken Lance. This movie marked the end of Widmark's 7-year deal with Fox 20th Century. When I was 40, he thought it was time for something new. He was tired from going from one show to another, the next one without a break. Read more. Most importantly, he thought he could make more money if you work alone as an actress. And, his daughter, said that her dad was a family man who always liked it home, it's quiet. At this point, Richard lived with his family on a ranch in the San Fernando that is Quiet Valley. Wanting more freedom with their ideas, Widmark began making his own music company and gave it the name Heath Productions, after the middle name of Anne. But 1956 caused me to lose my heart. Goodness, Ethel May, my mother, died just one year after his brother died, Trump. Even though Widmark didn't talk much speaking in public about his Hollywood foes, close friends and co-stars over the years have talked about the stars who made him mad. No matter what it was, because of their pride, being lazy, or Widmark was acting and didn't have much to offer. Hold on for those who didn't taking things as seriously as he did. And those who knew him well say that it was impossible for him to work with 5 players stand, even if they were well known. First place goes to Frank Sinatra. The head of the may have charmed everyone on the board. He was nice, but Richard Widmark wasn't impressed. They worked on The Detective together in 1968, and the event was said to have been made Widmark very angry. Sinatra's loose way he felt about the craft and his habit of showing up late and telling them to shoot scenes quickly with little planning were completely different from Widmark's method based on rules. One crew member then said, Frank was Richard's idea. All charm and no commitment. Widmark, acting was a holy thing. It looked like any other job. Marlon Brando has too. Widmark had a mix. How you feel about Brando? He admitted it. Even though the younger star is talented, smarts, but couldn't stand his way of acting pranks. Marco's his erratic behavior, his failure to learn lines by heart, and his steady improvising made Widmark very angry. That's it. Even though they never worked together directly, Widmark was once said to have saying, "Some people need chaos to make that slight jab, or focus on it." A lot of people thought it was aimed right at Brando. Tony Curtis comes in third. While The Long Ships was being filmed in '64, Widmark and Curtis were both in the same movie. But not near friends. Curtis was well known because of his pride, often spending more time in the chair for makeup than with the script. He was rough on the set. Widmark was getting ready for the fashion show. To do the job. Their tension behind the scenes looked like it to everyone. The stage assistant said Widmark didn't dislike Curtis for what he was, but for what he said he was. To Widmark, Curtis had a lot of style but not much content. Robert Mitchum comes in at number 4. Relaxed, infamously drunk and uncaring. Mitchum was the cool cat in Hollywood. However, Widmark, that lack of concern was almost bad manners. Mitchum often talked about very little he did to get ready for parts. Once, "I just show up and hit my mark, read the lines and say them." Widmark, who played every part like it was a battle to be won, found this attitude very annoying. Even though they looked the same age of movies and their ideas, things couldn't have been more different. Widmark said, "Don't coast through greatness," once said to a friend after seeing Mitchum on screen. Number 5, Kirk Douglas. It might be the most shocking name on the list. Both of them were tough, intense, and players in charge, but maybe that was the issue. Too much alike. Douglas seemed like a scene to Widmark. Steeler, always trying to get ahead of the crowd others. His deep, dramatic voice feelings and need to take over every Widmark didn't like frame. Word got around that Widmark once turned down a big part against Douglas said, "There's still room for there is one storm in a scene," and Kirk during the whole storm. Having personal problems, Richard Widmark professionalized the way things looked on the outside. He was never the type of person to air your dirty clothes in public or start a rumor, but people who know him well say they thought artists had a being responsible to the public, to the script, and to each other. Did not accept that, whether out of ego or just being lazy, he took it personally. 1957, Richard Widmark played a lead role in June Lockhart and Richard Basard in Limit on Time. After a year, he showed up in with Doris Day and Gig Young in The Love Tube. That same year, worked together with Robert Taylor and Patricia Owens for The Law and Jake Wade. Widmark had turned into there is a well-known face and name, and he said yes when someone asked him if since his fame had invaded his privacy, it doesn't matter how well-known and is a singer. Things will be fine for him if he wants to. In 1960, Widmark what Jim Bowie did in John Wayne's Making the Alamo. Interestingly, Wayne wanted him to play at first. Colonel William Travis, not Bowie. Even told the 5'10" Widmark, "You're not big enough to play Jim Bowie," but Widmark responded with confidence, "I will be," and he proved it. In 1961, Widmark played the lead role in the western Two-Lane Road with James Smith and Shirley Jones. He talked about at least most of the time on set, Jimmy Stewart and John Ford had a lot to do. Fighting, mostly about the old fight. Stewart wouldn't stop wearing his cowboy hat, a hat he'd worn in a number of western roles. Even though things were tense behind the scenes, in the end, Shirley Jones said that Richard Widmark was the only one who stood out. Man she ever loved deeply. They were both very nice to me. Being careful with me, she said. Maybe nothing ever came of how I felt. That's why I loved him. The same year, it was Widmark who played the American the lawyer in the Nuremberg trial, acting with legends like Spencer. He worked with Tracy and Burt Lancaster in 1962. Joined a strong group that included Jimmy Stewart, John Wayne, Gregory Peake, Henry Thomas, Carol Baker, Debbie Reynolds, and in the great movie How the West Was Won. The movie made a huge $15 million. But made the company a lot of money. More than $50 million. Widmark and his wife Jean were living the good life on their 20-acre farm, a home in Connecticut. In 1966, came back to the screen with Alvarez Kelly, in a Civil War play with Janet Rule and William Holden. The next year, he was in The Way West with Kirk Douglas and Robert Mitchum Douglas. It's sad that just 2 years the Alvarez Kelly Widmark got it was terrible news. His father Carl had died in New Orleans at the age of 70. Richard Widmark showed up in 1974 There Is Murder on the Orient Express. With stars like Lauren Beale, and he was in a lot of other movies later in 1982. Hanky Panky is a movie that his friend Sidney Poitier and played along with Gilda Radner and Gene Wilder. 1987, when he was 72 years old, Widmark said that film was no longer exciting. He told him, "I've learned in my old age when making movies just gets old me. I only have a few years left, and I don't want to be on set for 12 hours just to record 2 minutes of video." Widmark made many appearances during his career. In more than 70 movies, too many to list, but what he was best known for was to play in westerns. In the same year, he talked to Parade magazine and told a strange story. A woman once slapped him in the street and called him a little squirt, and at other times a big man threw him out of his chair in a restaurant. "This business is different," he said with a laugh. He said yes when asked if he was good with money. Like some stars who lost everything, he made a joke. "No, I'm just cheap." With February 1990, when he was 75 years old, he got the DW, which is one of his highest awards, Griffith Award for Lifetime Achievement. His old friend Sidney Poitier give it to him. Widmark felt some of it and Sid said, "I can't believe you all came all the way to California just for this." Poitier answered, "For you, Dick, I would, but that same year broken hearts. Richard's loving wife, Jean, was told she had early-stage Alzheimer's. After she was diagnosed, he turned down roles to care for her full-time. He only came back once more in 1991 for the movie True Colors with John, to name a few. Cusack and Imogene Stubbs follow through on a promise. The next 7 years were very hard for Richard and their daughter, and while they watched Jean slowly faded away. On March 2, Jean died in 1997 from Alzheimer's. In Santa Barbara, California, they left, leaving behind a husband and a family in grief who had given her everything in her last few years. After only a few months after Jean died, Richard chose to sell the 80-acre ranch they love in Hidden Valley. It would be nothing without her. Not the same. Then 2.5 after many years, on September 27, 1999, Richard got married. He was 84 years old at the time. The actor Susan Blanchard, who is 71 years old, longtime friend of the family.